When I saw her name flashing on my phone, my chest tightened like a knot I couldn't untangle. Clara. My sister. The one who had left me nothing, not a single letter, not a word, not even a memory in her will. And now, years later, she was calling me. Asking for help. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, the morning light sifting through the blinds, dust motes dancing in the slanted rays. My mug of coffee had gone cold, forgotten, as I stared at her name. My hand trembled slightly as I touched the screen, half expecting my thumb to betray me and slide to ignore. But something in me, something older and quieter, said, answer. Life, in its quiet persistence, had settled around me like a well-worn quilt. I had a small house on Elm Street, a garden I tended with stubborn love, and a job at the community library that kept me close to the rhythm of ordinary people and their stories. Most mornings, I'd rise with the sun, brew a pot of coffee, and listen to the rain tapping against the windows before opening the library doors. The smell of old books mingled with the earthy scent of damp pages, comforting, familiar. Neighbors knew me as the quiet one, the one who always had time to listen, who waved at the kids running to school, who remembered birthdays even when others forgot. I'd grown used to my life being modest, predictable, unremarkable, but safe. There was peace in my routines. Peace, and a gentle ache where my family's recognition had never reached me. Clara had always been the golden child, it seemed. Bright, ambitious, untouchable in her confidence. I had been the shadow. The one who stumbled, who spoke too softly, who was passed over without explanation when our parents' estate was divided. It wasn't just the money, it was the message wrapped tightly around it. That I mattered less. That my life, my struggles, my loyalty, were somehow invisible. And yet, I had survived. I had grown into a woman who could make her own small miracles, her garden blooming, the library's children laughing, her own heart learning that love could exist without acknowledgement. But now, hearing Clara's voice, or rather imagining it, since I hadn't picked up yet, I felt that old ache stir. Curiosity and caution warred inside me. Why would she call me now? What disaster could possibly drive her to seek the very person she once excluded, the person she had so decisively cast aside? I traced the rim of my mug with a finger, feeling the chipped ceramic under my skin, and whispered to no one, "What have you done this time, Clara?" I didn't yet know that answering this call would pull me into a storm of family secrets, moral reckonings, and choices that would test the very core of who I had become. I pressed the green button, and her voice came through, brittle and unfamiliar, like glass about to shatter. "Hi, it's me," she said, almost a whisper, as if she were apologizing for every year that had passed. "Clara," I said, my tone steadier than I felt. "It's been a long time." "I know," she admitted, a pause thick with unsaid things. I need your help." The words hung in the air. My kitchen felt smaller suddenly, the sunlight harsh against the counter. Help? From Clara? After all she'd done? I tried to force a smile, imagining her at the end of a phone line, her voice shaky with an unfamiliar humility. Something inside me stirred, a faint echo of the little sister I used to know, before inheritance disputes, before favoritism, before the cold division of our parents' will. Help with what? I asked cautiously. Her voice trembled, a tremor I didn't expect from the woman who had once seemed invincible. "The business, it's failing. Everything is gone. I don't know who else to turn to." I could hear the panic behind her words. The financial ruin, the desperation, but also, unmistakably, the shame. Clara, the sister who had left me in the shadows, was suddenly vulnerable. And it made my chest tighten. I didn't answer immediately. I sat with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the faint hum of traffic outside, the distant bark of a dog, the creak of the floor under my own feet. Memories flickered unbidden, her laughter at my expense, her smug insistence that she knew better than I ever could. My parents' funeral, the folded will in the lawyer's office, the silent shame that followed me like a shadow. But then came something else, something I hadn't felt in a long time, curiosity. Even after years of resentment, the possibility of witnessing Clara in her rawest form, stripped of pride and pretense, pulled at me. Why me? I finally asked, my voice low. Why now? She swallowed, though I couldn't see her. I could hear it. The pause stretched, a thin line of hesitation. Because you're the only one who ever cared enough to be fair. And I don't know if I can face this alone. It was a subtle crack in her armor, but enough. Enough to make me wonder if this was genuine, or a carefully calculated reach for salvation. My mind raced, sifting through years of hurt, betrayal, and the quiet resilience I had built around myself. I put the phone down for a moment, feeling the weight of choice pressing into my shoulders. Should I consider helping her? Or should I hold fast to the justice of what had been denied to me? That afternoon, I noticed other signs. Old receipts for unpaid bills tucked under her name in my mailbox. A mutual friend hinting at bankruptcy in passing. Even her social media, usually polished and untouchable, revealed desperate cries for guidance hidden in subtle updates. Something was real here. Something was urgent. And yet, a small, cautious voice inside me whispered, "Be careful. You've been burned before by family loyalty, and sometimes justice is the only warmth you get." I brewed a fresh cup of coffee and watched the steam curl upward, wondering if the warmth of this ordinary ritual could steady me for the storm I knew was coming. A few days later, I found myself standing in the shell of Clara's office, the air heavy with dust and the faint smell of burned coffee. The place was silent except for the ticking of a wall clock, and the faint, uneven hum of an old heater struggling against the November chill. Papers were scattered across the floor, some soaked and curling from leaks in the roof, others crumpled as if discarded in frustration. Clara hovered near the doorway, her posture rigid, hands twisting a gold bracelet that once glinted in the sunlight but now looked dulled, weary. I don't know where to start," she admitted, her voice fragile. I nodded, though I wanted to shake her. Years of resentment pooled inside me, a quiet river of anger barely contained. "Start anywhere," I said softly. "I can't fix what I don't understand." She led me to her desk, which looked like it had been stripped of everything valuable. Filing cabinets stood open, drawers emptied, as though someone, or she herself, had been searching for answers. And maybe that was exactly what she had been doing. "Here," she said finally, picking up a thin envelope yellowed at the edges. She handed it to me like it carried both guilt and hope. My fingers hesitated as I broke the seal. Inside was a letter from our parents, dated a few weeks before their deaths. I recognized the handwriting instantly, my father's careful, looping letters, and my mother's delicate, almost imperceptible script in the margins. The words hit me with a force I hadn't anticipated. Clara had not taken the entirety of the inheritance for herself, at least, not intentionally. My parents had made decisions, yes, decisions that left me out, but the reasons were buried in fear, misunderstanding, and assumptions about me that were no longer true. I never knew," Clara whispered. "I thought you didn't care. I thought you'd never forgive me if I asked for help." I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time in years, I saw the sister I had loved before resentment took root. Her eyes were red, lined with exhaustion, but there was something raw in her vulnerability that pierced through every memory of slights, of coldness, of inheritance disputes that had haunted me. The letter also revealed another truth. There had been a clause, an unspoken provision in their estate plan, that could have benefited me if only certain conditions had been met, conditions that my parents had assumed I would never pursue. They had died believing I would walk away, hurt and disillusioned. And in a way, I had, until now. Clara's voice shook as she added, "I don't expect forgiveness. I just don't know who else to turn to. Can you help me?" I sat down, letting the envelope fall onto my lap. The weight of the years, the resentment, the unspoken words, settled around me like the dust in that office. I felt the familiar ache in my chest, but this time, it was mixed with something else. Something heavier and yet strange, a sense of moral reckoning, the delicate balance between justice and compassion. The room seemed to shrink and expand all at once, the afternoon light casting long shadows across the floor. I realized then that my choice would not just shape Clara's future, but mine as well. Could I rise above old grievances? Could I extend my hand, not out of obligation, but out of understanding and humanity? I inhaled slowly, the smell of old paper and faint coffee grounding me. The answer was not simple. But the first step had been taken, acknowledging the truth. And for the first time in years, the river of anger inside me felt like it could be redirected, not destroyed, not wasted. I left Clara's office that day with a heaviness that pressed on my chest, but also with a quiet determination. The wind had picked up outside, rattling the remaining leaves on the bare trees, and the faint scent of damp earth clung to my coat. I walked slowly, letting each step echo in my mind, thinking over the letter, her words, the years of silence and neglect. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook open, scribbling a list of what could be done. Practical things, concrete things, loans, legal advice, contacts I had through the library and the community. I knew her pride would never let her ask the right people herself. And yet, I also knew that any action on my part was an act of choice, not obligation. I had to remind myself that. The next morning, I called her. She sounded different, a little steadier, but still brittle, like glass that might crack under the wrong touch. "I've been thinking," I said carefully. "I can help, but you have to be honest with me." "Everything." Her silence was brief, but telling. "I will," she promised. No more hiding. We met again in her office, and I began the work of untangling the mess. Bills, contracts, debts, overdue payments, it was like walking through a house that had been stripped bare by a storm. I could see her anxiety writ large in every misplaced paper, every tremor in her hands. And I could not forget the years she had left me in the shadows, the inheritance she never gave. That memory surged like a tide, but I held it back, using it as a compass rather than a weapon. We worked long hours over the next week. I taught her to read the financial statements, to prioritize creditors, to negotiate with calm firmness rather than fear. She listened. I watched her slowly shed the layers of shame, and in turn, I shed some of my anger, the old resentment that had hardened like concrete in my chest. One afternoon, while sifting through old files, I came across a folder marked Clara, personal. Curiosity urged me, but I hesitated. Respect for her privacy held me back. Still, I peeked inside just enough to see letters of apology from our parents, and a note she had written but never sent. "I am sorry for everything. I see now what I took for granted." I felt a strange warmth at that recognition, acknowledgement. A quiet moral victory, not for me, not for revenge, but for the truth finally revealed. By the end of the week, Clara had made the first payment to her creditors, negotiated extensions where she could, and begun mapping a plan to rebuild her business, slowly, steadily. She didn't thank me in grand words, she barely said it at all. But I didn't need her to. I had learned something more important: helping someone, even someone who once wronged you, can be a form of justice itself. Not the justice of the law, not the justice of inheritance, but the justice of the heart. That night, I sat on my porch, listening to the rain patter softly against the roof, and realized that this storm we had weathered together wasn't just about money or pride, it was about recognition, about seeing each other fully, flaws and all. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to begin building something neither of us thought possible. Word travels faster than we think, especially in a small town like ours. By the time Clara managed to send the first notice to her creditors, neighbors and friends had begun whispering. Some were sympathetic, people who had known me for years, who remembered the quiet patience I'd carried through every slight, every unkind remark from my family. Others were curious, skeptical even, about why I had stepped in. The first confrontation came at the library, of all places. Mrs. Whitaker, a longtime patron and friend, approached me with her knitting basket clutched to her chest. "I heard about your sister," she said softly, eyes careful. "Some folks say you shouldn't, help her after everything." I nodded slowly, letting the tension settle like dust on the bookshelves. Maybe they're right, I said, voice calm. Maybe I shouldn't. But I did. And I had my reasons. She tilted her head, the kind of tilt that only someone who truly sees you can do. Sometimes, she said, the right thing isn't the easy thing. And it isn't always the fair thing, but it's still the right thing. Her words lingered as I walked home that evening, the smell of rain-soaked asphalt rising with each step. Across the street, I noticed neighbors peering through windows, some with admiration, others with suspicion. I had expected whispers, judgments, maybe even ridicule, but I hadn't expected this strange, complicated sense of approval. Clara herself was more cautious. She called me less frequently, but each call carried a quieter, more grounded tone. She no longer flinched at my questions or explanations. Instead, she listened, absorbed, and acted. I watched her reputation, too, begin to shift, not overnight, but gradually. People started seeing her as someone taking responsibility, not merely someone fallen from grace. And in that shift, I saw a reflection of the moral justice I had hoped to create. It wasn't perfect. Not all family members understood, not all friends agreed. Some still whispered about the past, about inheritance disputes and sibling rivalry stories. But I had learned something essential: justice isn't always about what people see, or what history records. Sometimes, it's about quietly making the right choice, about showing the courage to rise above old grievances and act with integrity. One evening, Clara and I met at the small cafe where we used to share birthdays before life's complications stole those moments. She looked across the table at me, a shadow of the pride she had once carried, softened now by humility and gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. I smiled faintly, stirring my coffee, the clink of the spoon echoing softly in the quiet cafe. "You don't need to," I replied. Sometimes helping someone isn't about thanks. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard. And as I walked home, past the streetlights glimmering on wet pavement, past houses filled with laughter and ordinary life, I realized that justice, like kindness, often works quietly. It doesn't always announce itself. It just unfolds, and sometimes it heals not just the wounded, but the wounded hearts who choose to act. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, the tension between Clara and me began to ease into something that felt almost like peace. Her business stabilized, modestly but steadily. She called me less often, no longer because she feared I would reject her, but because she had begun to trust herself again. I found myself walking past her office one morning, the winter sun glinting off the frost on the windows. Inside, I saw her at her desk, the same office that had once been a chaotic storm of papers and panic, now orderly. She paused, looked up, and gave me a small nod of acknowledgement. No words were necessary. I understood the gesture fully. It was a recognition of shared effort, of accountability, of a bond complicated but not broken. I thought a lot about the years I had spent resenting her. I had carried that shadow long enough to know it intimately, to recognize how it had shaped me. And yet, helping her, guiding her through the rubble of her mistakes, had been its own kind of freedom. I had learned that forgiveness, or even something close to it, isn't about condoning the wrongs done to us. It's about reclaiming our own peace, about refusing to let bitterness dictate the rhythm of our lives. One evening, I sat on my porch, the sky painted in bruised purples and soft golds, and I noticed the faint smell of the frost melting into the air. My garden, battered by winter, already hinted at the green shoots of early spring. I realized then that life, like the seasons, moves forward whether we carry grudges or let go. Clara came by that night, unannounced. She brought a small box of pastries from the cafe she had reopened in town, her hands shaking slightly as she set it on the table. "I just wanted to share," she said quietly. There was no dramatics, no grand apology, just a simple gesture of acknowledgement and respect. I smiled, picking up a pastry. "Thank you," I said. "For sharing, and for trying." She nodded, and we sat together in companionable silence, the past acknowledged but no longer controlling us. It struck me then that moral redemption, the kind that matters most, often comes quietly, without fanfare or applause. It comes in the choice to act with courage, to confront the mistakes of the past, and to allow compassion to guide the present. I thought about my parents' letter again, and the assumptions they had made. I thought about the inheritance that had seemed like a final judgment. And I realized that life's true inheritance is not wealth or property, it is understanding, empathy, and the ability to act with integrity even when the path is difficult. That night, as I closed the porch door against the cool air, I felt something settle in my chest. Not happiness, exactly, there was too much history for that, but something warmer, steadier, acceptance. I had learned, finally, that family isn't only about blood or law. It's about recognizing each other fully, flaws and all, and making the choice to act with honesty and heart. And sometimes, that choice is the only justice worth having. As I sit here tonight, the house quiet except for the soft tick of the clock and the faint hum of the heater, I find myself thinking about choices. About the ones we make in the dark, when no one is watching, when no one will ever know the courage it took, or the fear we had to face. Family is messy. Blood doesn't erase hurt. Inheritance disputes, sibling rivalries, years of unspoken resentment, they leave scars. And yet, sometimes, healing comes not from what was taken or lost, but from what we choose to give. Even when the world expects us to turn away. Clara and I are not the same sisters we once were. The black sheep and the golden child have traded some of our old pain for understanding, our anger for quiet compassion. And that is enough. That is more than enough. I wonder, my dear ones, if it had been your sister, your brother, your parent, would you have extended your hand even after the hurt? Would you have chosen justice or mercy? Would you have let the past shape you, or would you have shaped the future with it? Tell me in the comments, my dear, what would your heart have done? And if you found yourself carrying the weight of family wrongs, would you find the courage to act with both honesty and compassion? If my story touched you, if it made you think, reflect, or feel, please subscribe and support. Join me, and let's share these quiet truths together, because sometimes, the smallest act of reflection can change a life. Thank you for listening. Thank you for remembering that even in broken families, even in the shadows of old wounds, there is light if we choose to see it.